Okay, everyone, we will start back up for this final crescendo or final session, which is me. So I had quite a few different agendas with this presentation. I want to tell you about some of my research. I wanted to summarize some of what we've done today, maybe provide some practical ideas on how we could move forwards in the short term. And I also wanted to introduce some of the speakers we've got to look forward to tomorrow. So that's the plan, and we'll see how we get on. All right. I'll be speaking quite a lot about this paper, which I wrote with colleagues here, which was really exploring an ecological dynamics approach to physical education. We explored where we had been and potentially what our implicit understanding in the wider educational context was, what we mean by skill or a motor skill, and some of that theory which maybe underpins that. But then potentially what happens if we look forwards and look in a different direction? And that takes us to an ecological approach. And not just what it means, it asks us to reconsider what skill is, but also our philosophy on how we go about education and how we understand what we're trying to do. So hopefully through this presentation that will become more clear. What drives my research is, and where I've started, I've always been interested in children's movement skills. I've worked in physical education for a number of years now. And one thing I've worked when I was working in Australia, and there was huge studies going on of whole states on movement skills and being tracked from the 1980s through, looking at what's the current state of play from a movement skill level. And what we're seeing is this kind of dip, a decline in their level of movement competence, we may say, their movement competence. But we're seeing now the same. Well, back in 2011, a large study was done in Europe, and we were seeing children, a high proportion of children were not engaged or did not have good coordination potentially for what they potentially could have done for compared to, say, their generations which had come before. And this was a study I did with a good colleague of mine from Belgium, where we explored Belgium and Australian children, and we could see there was a shift to the left of a bell curve. They weren't as good as maybe their parents were on these kind of basic movements: running, throwing, jumping, catching. We have to really, we go forward a little bit, and what we see in the UK, very sensitive. We see in the UK, things have not improved in the last 5 years or so, but we also are really starting to understand that the environment is playing a huge influence on this. It's not maybe down to our teaching methods. Okay, it's about this wider environment. So this study, we found that if you are a female, and the culture as well, not when I talk about environment, I'm talking culture, not just a physical built environment. If you're a female and you're from English as your second language, then you're significantly more likely to have a poorer movement skill repertoire, potentially. And I guess this data aligns with the data we're seeing from physical activity and public health, but we're seeing children aren't as physically active. Play spaces have shifted. Children used to play 8 out of 10 play spaces were outside. Now 8 out of 10 have moved more to inside. Okay, less opportunity to be being active. We see an increase in sedentary behavior, screen time, those types of activities. These have costs, but one of the costs is potentially a lower movement skill repertoire. Physical education. Okay, how do we, it's not, is it the silver bullet? Probably not, but we can do something. We could look at it, and what we're going to is we can start to look at it different. One thing is very clear, it's very complex. It's not just putting more content in or better training of teachers on a particular thing. All right, it's dynamic, it's changing, it's a living thing in many ways itself. This study back again, 2006, a bit later, 2008, it was really highlighting this, the interaction, interaction between students, their teachers, their parents, their coaches are all going to influence physical activity, not just one thing or one way. But also this one would really highlight the contextual variables, which included the environment, the importance of environment. And when we start to talk about skill, we need to not just consider what we're seeing in front of us, the physical, but also really what's sitting behind that, the context that the child's in, the environment, and how that's shaping that skill. The other thing we have to understand is what's come before, all right? And we need to appreciate what's currently happened before and what shaped our physical education curriculum, because parts of that are still there, very much in front of our eyes. Physical training, military style, okay? We use the word drills. We use these types of words to describe and explain and choose what we do in our curriculums. They stay forwards, they go through. We've seen it shift. Back in the 1950s in the UK, they had this more exploration, movement education curriculums came in. That was great excitement and actually probably an opportunity to go in a different direction. The theories of science at the time were telling us something, or the popular theories of science time were telling us how we learn and how we become skilled. It was in a different direction. So it didn't, and it never really gained traction. And also it put a lot of faith in the teachers, this moving and growing curriculum. But again, it's beyond the scope of today's talk. And what we've seen in England, Australia, when I was working there, but also from hearing today, we see this more coming to the front of this sport performance PE, technical, tactical ideas around physical education. But as Oyvind told us earlier, and really it's great because I'm kind of going to be repeating some of the things he's been telling us, is this is an ecological problem we have rather than a decision maybe by the teacher themselves. Okay, it's about the environments which we are using, the school halls. It's broader than the content of what we are delivering. And it's about policy, and not just PE policy, it's about educational policy. In the UK, again, Harvard this morning highlighted some really key instrumental educational papers which has shaped the whole educational policy in the UK, Kirchner's cognitive load theory, and a push against discovery-based practices. That's being used as a framework for the wider education curriculum for maths, English, sciences, and so forth in our UK curriculum. That's what Ofsted will use to try to understand how the teacher's having those pedagogical interactions with the child. At the heart of this, theory of cognitive load and other cognitive theories of learning, we see learning is developing through schematics, for acquiring knowledge and making connections with schemas. Okay, that's not unfamiliar to what we look at when we talk about the oldest types, or I say older, a cognitive approach to skill acquisition, the information processing theory, which was again came out of the work of Paul Fitz in the Second World War. This idea really that, as again Harvard's mentioned to us this morning, the brain is a processor of information. We take information in from our visual, auditory, proprioceptive system. As that information comes in, we make sense of it, we process it, and if it's useful, we store it. So it goes from a short-term into our long-term memories. Okay, it's a top-down approach. So what we have here is this idea of a top-down approach. And the more developed that schematic becomes, the more powerful, the better we are at processing that information, the quicker we can do it. Hence, we saw reaction time studies if we go back. What this kind of takes us in this idea, but context doesn't matter as much, environment doesn't matter as much. What is important is the information. What is important is actually the repetition of practicing, the rehearsal of these ideas. Fitz and Posner's model stages of learning. Okay, when I see it in PE lesson. I see it in the lesson planning. We idea this idea that learning of a developing of a skill, okay, is a cognitive task which is to do with problem solving. So in early learning, we do not know anything, okay, and as such, okay, it's going to take a lot of cognitive capacity to be able to process the basics. So that means to help the learner, what we do is we put them into isolated practice, a drill which may be dribbling through cones, okay, chest pass to your partner, chest pass to a wall, okay, right? Once we have that basic schematic, the schema, okay, but now our cognitive resources, our processor, can start to do other things. What it can start to do is focus on environmental cues, environmental information. So what happens is we add in maybe a defender, play a game of piggy in the middle, as we would call it in the UK. But you would bring in, so it becomes a little bit more game-like. They're still trying to, at the social space, understand the skill, still playing with it. But what they are doing is starting to focus at the environment. So we have our second drill, our simplified game, our simplified activity. Before we move into our kind of autonomous stage, which is where we start to, our cognitive resources, now the skills become automatic. We no need to think about it. We can dribble the ball down a wing, and we can be looking up in a box to see who we need to pass it to, and we'll cross it in. Okay, but that's where all our attention, all our environmental attention is on. And we've seen these through the 80s, 90s, and sit here, we use linear plans in our planning. We go from, we're going to focus on this part of the tactics, and we're going to focus on these parts of technical within our learning outcomes. We're trying to get to, we also look at, well, okay, we're going to do drill one. We're going to do some different parts for 10 minutes till we've got it. Then we'll move on to our second part. And then the third part will go into a game. It's a traditional plan. It's what we tend to see. So I now want to move us to now reconceptualize physical education in a different way, to start thinking, well, is there an alternative? And again, it starts with our theories, all right? When Paul Fitz was in Washington working with the generals on trying to train up fighter pilots as fast as he can, there was also James Gibson, who was also working for the army. And he was working again at trying to train fighter pilots, but did so in a different manner, had different ideas about perceptual learning, what perceptual learning is. So I'm going to touch on here ecological dynamics and rather than thinking about acquiring and then that we are taking things in, we want to think about skill adaptations. So we're not actually acquiring anything, but there's definitely cognition going on, but it's outward facing. We'll hear more about this tomorrow and beyond the scope of today. But I want to talk about skill adaptation and the work by Keith and others around ecological dynamics. I'm going to just focus on two theories. The first being ecological psychology and the idea of direct perception. So before I spoke about the information processing, and that's indirect perception. For us to understand or for behavior to happen, we have to take information in and process it. So it's indirect, then we build a representation of what that looks like. For ecological psychology and direct perception, says there's no need to process information. All the information we need is in the environment which is around us. So we see here what's the idea of direct perception is that the light arrays from the lights, the sun, whatever the physical source of light is refracting off of the environmental features, the surfaces, the floor, those different parts. And what that means, and it's continuously changing. So as we move through it, it's refracting in different ways. So new opportunities come into play and other opportunities disappear. All right. So we have a theory. So what does that mean for PE? Well, what it means for PE is if we've got them in that cognitive stage of learning, where we've got all the information out of the environment and say we've set up some cones for them to dribble around, the only information they have to adapt to is the information which is refracting off the cones in the floor. So they don't learn to dribble a football, they learn well, they do learn to dribble football. They learn to dribble a football round cones, which means their heads will be looking down, and that's where the information is. The same activity from this idea would be you would have a shadow defender who would not say just don't tackle them, but just kind of go back with them or whatever. And that means that the light would be refracting off different parts, but it'd be more representative of the game itself. So there's little things such as that. The dynamical systems part, so Bernstein, and as I said, we've heard about some of this today. But what does it mean in, how am I going to describe it today? Well, what we've got, we like to start to think of the human body as a dynamical system. It's obviously within a wider dynamical system, a class, etc. But when we start to understand it as a dynamical system, we understand that all the different skeletal, cardiovascular, cardiorespiratory, all these systems are adapting and self-organizing continually to help us help us with our functional movement based on this direct information we're taking in. So this was kind of when I was going to these theories, I was like, okay, what does this mean for physical education? Well, we start to understand the learner not as someone we're trying to give information and trying to build up these schemas, but instead as a complex adaptive systems who are afforded opportunities as they're moving through the environment, okay? So information in the environment, enriching an environment is very, very important, all right, for us to see authentic movements. So it started me on a journey of starting to understand and think of a teacher as a landscape designer. And as I said, there's been lots of work by, we'll hear from Jai tomorrow and Ian and others Renshaw, who've explored and explained this. We think of ourselves as a landscape designer where functional movement solutions will come based on this interaction. We've been through this, so the task, the environment, the organism interacting, and we will see a functional movement solution, not a motor skill we've learned, but a movement solution will emerge. But, oh, you can't say, but if we had his affordances based on his organism action capabilities, so his height will be different than this little girl's action capabilities. So that shouldn't have popped up there, but instead of he may jump over, she may decide to slide under. They're both functional, they both work based on their movement solutions. So I don't know if this video will play at all, if that will. But we can just see here, like, again, it's just a simple class. Right, kids, go and run and have a jump over. But what we see is based on this idea of the interaction between the task, the current capabilities of that child, their previous experiences, their height, all these things, we see different movement skills emerge. But that's the starting point of where I'm working from, not towards some kind of preconceived where I'm trying to get them to. All right, so I'm working on that information I'm seeing and understanding there's a process of an interaction going on. And actually, how can I perturbate, I'll come on to that behavior. So that's kind of a theory which sits behind, but the more I thought or looked at this and in the paper, let's start at the beginning and some of the questions we've had, but maybe some layers of physical education and some of these questions we've been asking today. And this idea of enriched environments, what does that mean? Like Dick Fosby, very creative man, famous for going over on his back, first one to ever do it. Little do we know, or is it publicized, that he was the first, well, this was the first Olympics, but the mat was in play, okay, the crash mat. Before that, they did it onto tires and sand. If you jump into tires and sand backwards, you're probably going to end up in hospital, okay? So we start to understand that the creativity movement comes from what the environment affords you or offers you. So this is something, first of all, like a bigger question, all right? Education, what separates maybe an educational teacher to a coach? Coaches, all right, and I'm saying physical educators, coaches they may simplify the task into a swimming pool, but the coach's intention's taking them towards this, again, towards and not grassroots, but with the main idea for coaches is performance-based. It's working towards more faster times, more technical, not technical, but yeah, trying to actually get them into more competitive environments. What about a PE teacher? Okay, we've got 11 years with them, 12 years potentially with these children, and we can have a strategic plan. Are we attending? Are we looking in the papers, reading? If we see this headline, does that make us go, hang on, right? This is my job. This is what I'm in education to try to change. Okay, this is where I can actually have a really meaningful impact on children's life. So partly, and again, brilliant work going on up at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. We're seeing they're trying to educate teachers, and we're here tomorrow from John about how they're working with primary school children to really make this a central part of the curriculum, all right? And really, and I guess if I come back, we're insensitive to the wider environment dynamics that the children are currently navigating, but what they are going to be navigating throughout their life course. That's what we start to do. So this is where trying to come up with a plan and how we can make sure that they are safe in here. Okay, and some wonderful research done by Chris Button and colleagues over in New Zealand, because this is where we have the problem. Another thing I just want to bring up, again, another short-term solution, and this is, again, I'm speaking to the UK and maybe to Australia too a little bit, and but also from short conversations I've had potentially here in Norway as well. And this is really a challenge and a question. Time to start thinking about symmetry, all right? In planning and design of children's PE experiences. Why is it PE typically taught in units? Why does every lesson have to take place here? Okay, and what lessons I'm talking about is gymnastics. We have talked a lot about content. We've talked a lot about the teacher and how they facilitate a working environment. But we don't think about how an environment can become a pedagogical driver. How that can potentially, if you've got 6 weeks with a student, why do you need a new activity each week? Why instead could you not change the environment on where they're doing that activity? Every time you come to something, learning to learn to move, each time you come to something, you're coming to it fresh and new. Synergies have changed, you've changed as a person, okay? Potentially we can take them, put these environments, be doing similar to the same activities. It doesn't take a lot of planning, but actually we're doing a lot more. They're getting used to new surfaces, new spaces, places potentially they will play. So that 6 weeks, start to think about, don't change what I'm teaching, but change where I am teaching as potential. Again, creative dance, okay? We have wonderful speakers now, which you can put in your pocket and they're ridiculously loud. Again, they have long battery life, they're waterproof. We currently tend to teach it in halls. But why? Why can't we teach it? Think about the environment. Think, how creative would a dance be if we went and popped it in a place like this? What kind of movements would the children come up to? How would they start to learn about geography, these other elements as well? So we start to understand skill being embodied in the environment that they're in. Okay, again, so in basketball, and a sport which tends to be taught quite a lot, we have gymnasiums wonderfully equipped for it. It's a sport I'm passionate about. But I do wonder that, again, we teach it from year 7, say, to year 11. We tend to teach it in swimming pools, layup drills, into a chest passes, and then into a game, 5-on-5. And we'll do that for several years. But again, can we be trying to guide and nudge people towards sustainable physical activity? So here, We can play in the hall, no problems, but we could also take it out into the playground, which actually, if we think is more representative, where they can play for free every day over their summer, every day over all their holidays in the park. Okay, so we start to think, and if they start back, the ball will bounce similar on here as it will on here. Okay, if the surfaces are the same. Very few children in this class will go on to a basketball club. I wish that was not the case and everyone did it because it's a great sport, but that's not what's going to happen. All right, but we can, and actually 2 hours a per week isn't going to learn. You're not going to become an NBA player from that, or a half decent club environment. You will if you're down here every night, every morning, every summer holiday. That's where you're becoming skilled. Okay, and this is so when we start thinking about what a physical education curriculum, we start to think about education not as to instill in, but educare, which means to lead an individual out into the world, or lead an individual out. What we start to think is, well, okay, let's think, I'm going to organize my unit where I will first of all bring a bit of sport education or so in, where you get the children to organize themselves into 2s and 3s. We're going to play some pickup basketball. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hoops around, so it's more capable for them to do that. And we encourage these 1s and 2s and 2v1s, and I can be going around going, oh, you come and play with this team and you come over here to kind of create new challenges, new dynamics within there. And I can be really trying to think about, make sure it's fun and enjoyable and they're having a good time and working with small groups while other ones are playing. But we're also thinking about, as the unit progresses, we're going, well, let's go and play this week. We're going to do the same. We're going to go outside. We're going to play in the playground. And the final couple of units go, oh, do you know there's a park around the corner? Oh, no, I didn't. Or yes, I did. Let's go down to a park. Let's play hours. And you may get someone from the community to come down and tell them about what's basketball in the park. But the idea is it's leading them out into the wider world, which they're currently navigating anyway, or we hope they do, but they're currently out and about in. All right, so that's a bit. Now I want to get into nonlinear pedagogy and how this has helped me. So nonlinear pedagogy, we'll hear a lot about it tomorrow. So I'm not going to go into by Jai Chow and Keith have worked on this for many, many years. But it really helped me start to think differently about what that linear lesson plan is, rather than having that linear lesson plan and thinking about how I plan a session and then my interactions with the students within that session. So the first thing around this is representative learning design. We've heard from Keith, about more specifying of information, what information was in that environment. For instance, here, if I want a more discovery-based practices, which I tend to want in physical education, we've heard about, I think about themes of movements, what I want to emerge to happen. So I may say we're going to play handball. What's going to emerge from handball? Throwing and catching. Throwing and catching skills will emerge from handball. So that's the idea. Or if it's gymnastics and the theme wants to be rolling, okay, I'm not saying forward roll, backward roll, whatever, but I want rolling to be. I'll put lots of wedges and beams, which are kind of on slopes in the hall, because that will promote those type of skills to emerge. Perception action coupling. Well, that's the idea of this direct perception. But this is the one what can help me make it learner-centered. This can help me, okay, actually scale it to the equipment. So for instance, where I go, okay, well, if I'm playing handball, all right, the goal isn't going to be the adult goal. What I could do is measure the length of the children's hands or arms and then kind of scale it down. So it's still the same game they're playing. It's still the same ratio. So they still have to take 1 step or 2 steps to get to the goal. But it's working towards where current action capabilities are. And you do that at a class level. You can't do that on an individual child level. You go, okay, most 7-year-olds are what say hi. Okay, you can work that on a class level, which makes that potentially meaningful for them. But they then also would expect, based on specificity of practice, as they grow up, they get taller, we can move those goals out. Those skills will will follow on. What about external attention of focus or constraint led? Well, this is that idea of really the dynamical systems part, this self-organization going on and adaptations of the systems, and that idea of constraints for each time we are constraining the task. But the idea to promote self-organization, we will have promote an external attention of focus. So I'll come up before the class a list of questions, or not questions, a list of questions, open-ended questions, which I'm going, okay, how else could you do that? What happens if you were to come to it over here? What I wouldn't be doing is giving internal focus of attention. I'll bring your arm further back, bring your leg down, all right? I'd be trying to kind of aid self-organization. So my questioning, I would be trying to support that way. The same idea around constraints. As you're working, you might go, right, we're going to use this bigger ball because they're not able to catch it. Okay, we're going to use a softer ball, a harder ball. We start to change constraints, which will change the dynamics. And we will see potentially non-linear changes in the skilled behavior. You could also change, that's the changing the size of the pitch, these types of things, the task, the rules of the game, that can have a big impact. The final one, and what to me is one of the most important one, it's when we come in to say we think we've seen a learning moment or a teaching moment. When do we do that? And I think we do it anyway. We think, oh, they get bored. It may not just be bored, they may get stable. They get into this idea of functional variability, in that their system is self-organized to a point now that they are kind of just doing the same thing over and over. We see this stabilization of a movement skill. So my idea there, based on these two things, is to perturbate that movement behavior, okay, to make the whole system adapt. All right, so for instance, in gymnastics, I maybe said, what we're going to do is you're going to move, so this is what I did in the sample PE. What we need to do is we're going to move like animals from the Gruffalo, the storybook, and they're moving like mice. But then after a few minutes, they're all moving the exact same way and doing the exact same thing. I might go, right, we're going to add a fox in. The fox eats the mice. What happens? Next, the students are leaping over, diving under, climbing up to get out of the way. I've made one small change, but the whole lesson of a movement, the innovation we're seeing in movement is off the scales. So we're seeing whole different movement. So that's an idea. You can change, perturbate behavior on an individual or on a class level. We don't work on time. Time is not a factor here. I have 3 of these activity cards for each lesson. If I spend my whole time in activity 1, and there's been so much fun, we've come up with so many different constraints to change, rule changes, and there's so much enjoyment, innovation in the movement happening, we can do that next time. All right, but we're not being slave to, we're going to do 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. We'll spend there. Once, if we go, you know what, that game's run its course. They've got it, they understand it. There's not really any new ways we can take this. We move on to the next activity, and then we'll have a third one. But very rarely will you get to this third one, but that comes your next activity for the next lesson to do. But what it does, they're all based around a theme of movements you want to emerge. The games themselves will be slightly different, so it's going to emerge in different ways, but it will improve their movement vocabulary, and it makes sure it's playful and fun. Okay, so look, this is a study which we should have results out soon. It's a sample RCT, so skill acquisition methods, fostering physical literacy in physical education, early years physical education. Goodness, I can't believe I forgot that. We've run it where we've had a control school have carried on their standard PE. We've put a linear one in place and a non-linear pedagogy in place, and we just want to see. What we didn't do, we've made no, this is, in a way, I look back, it's a shame. It wasn't true non-linear pedagogy because all I focused on was what the teacher and how the teacher interacts and how we design the lessons. I didn't think, oh, we could have done it outside or we could have done it inside. That now, if I was to do it again, is how I would go about it, thinking much more broadly about how the environment educates. But what we are seeing, and as I say, we'll have a full result soon, but we are seeing that the children who had the non-linear pedagogy, this green line, are moving far more creatively in their environment, are far more exploring those environments than our linear and non-linear group. Okay, and that was across a whole variety of different skills. Tomorrow morning, we're very grateful to be joined by the three PhD students who drove this project and worked with myself and Dr. Lawrence Fairweather at Liverpool John Moores University, because they were not looking at the movement side, but they were exploring how does it impact on motivational climates and motivation of these children? How does it impact on physical activity of the children, both in the lesson but outside of school as well? And also we have Laura, who's looking at cognition. So how does it transfer to more academic achievement? Do we see changes there? So if you want to know more, see us tomorrow at 8 o'clock, 8:30. All right. How am I doing time-wise? Okay. We know, well, very exciting time to be in Norway. All right, really is. It has every opportunity as we have a new physical education curriculum, which we've been talking about and thinking about the possibilities in there. And we have some already wonderful work, lots of wonderful work going on. We have the concepts of Bildung. We have potential of exploration type of physical activity, exploration in PE, discovery, learning around pedagogy, alternative sports and activities being a prominent part of that curriculum, where actually it's self-driven by the students itself. All these things are possible at this time. They are. We can start to integrate more non-linear ideas around teaching and some of these ideas around what we mean by skill and thinking of the wider environment potentially impacts. But lots of this, and I've only had a short, but we've heard a lot about the ideas of bodily learning and how this concept impacts on Bildung and these ideas of cooperation in movement activities and so forth. And this one is very exciting to me, the nature and wandering and outdoor activities. Tomorrow, let's have a little look forwards now to what we have to look forward to. We have a very good friend of mine, Dr. Carl Woods, who is going to be speaking to us on skilled inhabitant knowledge and its implication for educationists. This is very exciting because it looks at learning from a very different place than what currently education does. It talks about dwelling. It talks about enskillment in place. It talks about, I think, Bildung in many ways, that slippery term we still need to do. But it really takes this ecological, anthropological things and how through dwelling in place, we move from here to having this sort of rich, deep knowledge of an environment, okay, which happens over time. So that will be tomorrow. We also have Duarte Arujo, okay, very lucky to have Duarte joining us to talk about ecological cognition. He'll be looking at in a sport environment, but also linking into these aspects. But really, again, starting to explore an alternative view to what currently education is looking at. We have Jayed Chow, okay, Associate Professor Jayed Chow from the National Institute of Education in Singapore, who's really inspired a lot of my work. I look at where I've come from, and I have a lot to thank to people like Jayed. And this book, in fact, I've read it many, many times. And he'll be joining us to talk more about the work they're doing in Singapore. Finally, also, following on from where Ivan's kind of spoken to us about these wonderfully complex and big interventions we have coming, and it's an important part of the puzzle, and in part of the puzzle we need to work together on and learn from. So, and to that line, we have Professor David Stodden joining us to talk about exploration, and really he's written this wonderful paper with many different colleagues to look at re-envision some of the ideas around intervention design and these activities. So we'll be hearing from David tomorrow, alongside Katerina Pese, who again has moved really an embodied cognition, looking at that, really starting to explore and look at transfer from learning from between different tasks as well. So she'll be joining us for our roundtable presentation at the end of the afternoon. Okay, and we will have a roundtable discussion where we can all come together and, yeah, what is next? And not just for physical education, but about lifelong journey, all right? We have an aging population. How can we keep that enrichment going at the other end as well. There's no reason a lot of these concepts and principles will not support that aspect as well. All right, thank you very much, everyone. That's it from me.